right, let's get back to it. This video is continuation of the sub-series about Auditd with Red Hat and all of the Linux Red Hat variants such as ALMA Linux, Rocky Linux, and CentOS Stream and CentOS. So previous videos, we've gone over many of the concepts. There was an overarching video, the very first one I did, and you'll see that one hopefully first. But the idea is I'm trying to break down the audit into manageable concepts so you can learn what is necessary and what you need to learn to deal with developing an audit configuration that works for you. So we've learned about the Auditd configuration. We've learned how to start the audit daemon using the system, not the system CTL, but the service, basically the legacy initd type of service scripts control. And now we are finally on the point where we're talking about audit rules, which are really important. The audit rules are important for helping the audit daemon manage the audit space, the system that pays attention to which rules are being triggered and what to specifically log to the audit.log file. All right, so audit rules are broken down into three general categories. The first one is called control rules, and these are very important for getting rules loaded, clearing out the rule set from memory, and so on. And I'll go over those, but basically I'm going to point out the fact that you can go to access.redhat.com, search for this URL. I'm going to highlight it. Hopefully you can see it with the light green background with the black text on there. And this particular web page is free for access. It's not behind a paywall, so you don't have to have a Red Hat customer portal account to get access to it. And if you're using any of the Linux Red Hat variants, then these pages will work for you. All right. So defining audit rules, we have control rules, we have file system rules, which is what they call them. I would like to maybe suggest that you think of these as path rules. Path as a directory or path to a file, all right? And then finally, system call rules, which are tied to system calls, and we'll get into that as well. Control rules, file system rules, and system call rules are all going to be adopted by you when you're coming up with your audit configuration, and you're going to implement them into the audit rules, in quotes, audit space rules files. And those audit space rules files can be named whatever you want. So I'm going to pull up a screen here. And it's important for you to know that because audit actually works in the kernel space to track all kinds of events, again, system calls, accesses to files or paths and so on, you need to make sure that you have escalated privilege. So you need to have access to root or you need to have root directly. And I don't suggest you take access to root directly, but I'm going to basically sudo up to root because there's going to be a few things I'm going to show you. I'm going to type in my password for my account where I have sudo access. And then I'm going to cd to /etc/audit/rules.d. Now this is the directory in RHEL 7, in RHEL, Red Hat 7 variants and newer. So Red Hat 7, Red Hat 8, Red Hat 9, and all the variants. So again, ALMA Linux, CentOS, CentOS Stream, and Rocky Linux. Okay, so you're going to find that you need to generate a set of rules. And in my case, I actually had this file set already created. If you have a file in here in this etc audit rules.d directory, and you want to participate in how the system behaves and what it records, you've got to make sure that it's in here. You've got to make sure that it's at least readable. Writable is kind of optional, but you know, if you want to update it, you need to make sure it's writable. And these files should be owned by root to keep these basically pristine and tightened down, and the accessibility to these files for any other reason other than to basically put rules up in memory and keep them secure. You can have several rules files in this directory by your decision. I'm going to do another video after this one at some point about how to come up with a rule set, and the things I would suggest are you always put I would suggest, this is not a dictation, I would suggest you put all your audit rules into a single file and then sort them by type and directives and so on, and then weed out the ones that are duplicates, because that's going to cause you a problem. Very important for you to know. And you need to weed out the ones that refer to paths that don't actually exist on your system, because then the audit rule won't load, and any other audit rule below that one in the file will also not rule. So this is a very meticulous process. Okay. Um, so we're going to go ahead and do a less on the unified rules file. This is one I created. I just called it unified. And these rules up here, specifically the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in my list here, and then way down here at the bottom, the very last one, the minus E as an echo 1, these are all of the control rules that we saw being referenced. Sorry, these are not all of them. These are some of them, but they are all the ones that I have in my rule set there. The control rules that we were talking about. All right, defining control rules, the dash lowercase b, the dash lowercase f, the dash lowercase e as an echo, r lowercase s, and I think that's dash l. So that's an audit CTL command. The dash capital D. So those are all of them, and I think there was a place somewhere in here that referenced the other ones I was using. But, you know, I'm not going to read for you. You can read. If you're doing this, you're hopefully old enough to read, and I don't mean to insult anybody. I'm pretty sure that most people can read in society now. All right. So we saw what rules I have in here, and then let's get back to the next section, file system rules. So there's two ways of doing file system rules. We're going to scroll down here, defining file system rules. You can have a dash W, which I would call a watch rule, as a subset of the file system category of rules, where you would specify the dash lowercase w, the path to your file. This is just a model with general labels here. Dash P, what permissions to pay attention to. Those are listed here. R for read, A for attributes, W for write, and X as an execute. So basically, if you have a configuration file under Etsy, you might want to keep track of who's looking at it. You might want to keep track of who's been changing it. You may want to keep track of who's been putting files into the Etsy directory, who's been deleting them. That would be handled through probably the write, because, you know, when you delete a file, you're actually overwriting the, I forget what it's called, the inode link. The link of the file name to the inode actually has the data in it. The execution of binaries, and then A, and the attributes. Now the attributes, just so we're clear, are things like the ownership, the group ownership, the mode of the file, and any file ACLs extended beyond the POSIX permissions. Okay, so those are things to be aware of. I'll show you a sample of some of those. So I'm going to cat the same file. And so basically everything here with a hyphen lowercase w, specifically in this particular highlighted set, is a watch rule. You can see here on this guy, we were basically watching the Etsy audit directory. And if you put just /Etsy/AUDIT, it's only going to look at just that path. That's it. But if you put the trailing slash on it, it looks at Etsy audit and all of the files and subdirectories as well. So be aware that the trailing slash right here, I can't get it highlight, here we go. The trailing slash actually indicates and recursively everything else, all right? So we've learned about the attributes here that we can put as permissions to track. And then the lowercase hyphen K there, that is referring to a key. So when something does happen here, it gets logged, and when it gets logged and you want to go looking for it, maybe somebody modified the content of a file or the content of the directory of Etsy audit, who did it? You can go looking for it based on perusing the logs and using the appropriate tools like AU search and AU report at some point, and use the hyphen K, this string here. And this is just my example. You could use whatever term you want. And if you're dealing with like government agencies and banking and so on, they usually come up with a standard of what they dictate to you for what you should be using. So just be aware of that. Now, if I were to use this file um, and I need to track Etsy audit like I'm doing here, I got to make sure I don't have a rule tracking Etsy audit here and then another copy of it somewhere down below, because these are sorted alphabetically by me earlier. But if you have two things tracking the same thing, your rules are going to have a problem. If you're putting something here, like if I put AUDI, AUDET, that directory does not exist in my system. That would obviously be a typo. Maybe you have it on your system because you did it delivery. I don't know. But if you did that and you did not have that path actually existing in your system, your audit rules would stop right at the spelling of the line with that spelling. Okay. So I'm trying to make sure I don't rush. I want to make sure I cover all the right details. I don't want to take too long in this video. There are other ways to do things where you're tracking files, as they call them in this here, the file system rules. There's another way of doing that, and those are related to the system call rules, but basically this is a file control rule using the system call setup, because it has -A. I call the -A rules action rules, but this is an action rule that is tracking permissions of executability with another parameter field for the path, specifically to the binary user bin LUA rocks. And then you're specifying the key here, spelled out KEY =, with its parameter, its value, but you're also preempting that with a -F, right? So these are a whole bunch of action rules that are actually looking at file system. This could have been easily been differently written out differently with lowercase w, -px, and then just spell that out without the path equals. And then you could put -k software -installer. All right, so there we go. We've covered now file system rules. Again, I would call them path rules, but let's stick with the industry term, God, I can't speak now, industry term for these types of rules. Finally, the system call rules, and these are really important. These are things for like tracking any system calls that your system might be doing related to like mounting of file systems or attribute changes and so on. There are a whole bunch of them, so be aware of that. Again, you can track with a key, you can use a field, and I'll show you some examples of that where you're using the field equals value. And here's like a preliminary example here on, again, the Red Hat page that you do have access to. All right, so you can define executable file rules like this. And one of the things you should also be aware of that sometimes you can specify the architecture and CPU, but that's specific to these action rules that are using system calls. It is not going to work for you with respect to file system rules. It is not going to work for you at all because it's not even necessary or appropriate for control rules. Okay, so I'll go back to the file and I will do a less on the file again. And you can see now here, there's an example. Action rule, always exit, -F, specifying the architecture of these system calls. Basically what we're saying is track these system calls in association with architecture 32-bit. B32 is their term for that. -F, specify the key. Again, they're spelling out the word KEY equals, and that's the string they wanted to use to identify it. All right. So this is the same thing twice, essentially. Two different keys on the same two system calls, and we're going to kind of have an issue because all of this from here to here is precisely the same. And the fact that it has two different keys is going to present a problem at some point when you're trying to load audit rules up. So be aware of that. If you're tracking these things, you might want to basically remove this rule specifically. Okay? And again, I will cover troubleshooting your audit rules in a different video. Okay, so we've gone over the different types of rules. I've shown you samples of what those types of rules look like. But you're not an expert. That's why you're coming to this channel and you need to learn how to do audit. That's why you came to look at these videos. So one of the things that's pretty cool about Red Hat is they actually provide you with a whole bunch of different sets of rules in independent files. Now, I don't mind using the files as a sample set, but I don't like using them and copying them in here into this Etsy audit rules.d directory and leaving them just as independent files. That's, in my mind, not good practice. Now, somebody like Steve Grubb, who works for Red Hat, who's actually taught me by, interacting with the user group for Linux Audit, he might have a different opinion. But for me, I like to keep things simple when I need to do troubleshooting. An audit is difficult enough, so I use a single file, like I've done here, to keep track of audit rules. So let me get to the point. If you need to get samples of a whole bunch of different types of rules that you should have on your system or want on your system, what you should do is go to User, Share, Doc, Audit, like that. And you may find sometimes when you do this, you'll have a Auditd. And, I'm wondering if I'm in the wrong place, because the audit rules used to be in that path. So, let me see what has happened here. I wonder if they've changed something since I made the last update to my system. But for the last 15 years easily, these rules were sample sets out of the way, not to affect your system unless you copy them in deliberately. Let me do RPM minus QA pipe egrep for audit, by the way. All the audit related packages are explicitly going to have the word audit in them. I'm going to do RPM minus QL of the audit package itself. Here we go. So user share man, that's all the man pages, by the way, very important for you to know. And user share doc. Wow. Oh, here we go. User share audit. So I was way off. They'd actually moved. I'm pretty sure they were using user share doc before. User share audit. And this is not version specific anymore. That is something they actually used to do as well. Is they put audit hyphen in the version number of the audit that you were using. And then sample rules. All right. So base configuration rules, no audit rules. Why you would ever do that, I don't know. Login UID rules. If you take a look at that, let's take a look at that one. 11-login UID rules. It's just that single rule and a comment line above it. 30 PCI DSS or STIG rules, which is a security technical implementation guide. Privileged rules for things to look out for. Power abuse. Let's take a look what that one might look like. 32 power abuse rules. So anybody doing stuff in the home directory and they decide to give the key called power-abuse. So the idea of this one is when an admin is abusing their power, so the idea is to track an administrator going into other people's home directories and tracking it and giving it the key of power-abuse so that you can do an AU search -K power abuse and find out which administrator on the system is going into other people's home directories. Now, sometimes an administrator has a reason to go into another person's home directory and do things, but what if they're being naughty and they're going into the home directory and maybe you have a very old way of setting up email and now administrators are diving into other people's emails? Not cool. So you want to audit that, and that's how this is one of those rules that would help you do that. All right. So let's take a look at the 71 rule set. Again, this one is saying, okay, for architecture 64-bit, we want to track the system call rules of exception connect. So basically inbound network connections, not like monitoring the NIC interface itself, but monitoring any traffic in and out, allowing the connection and connecting it all. Okay, and obviously I'm kind of talking out of my ass, so I apologize. And then you could do a less on the readme-rules file, and this actually explains to you better about those things. Okay, all right. So what I would normally do is target the ones I need, like these, and NISPOM rules, and the STIG rules, and privileged user rules. And maybe what I would do is copy them all into my, copy, not move, copy them all into my Etsy audit rules.d directory, and then take them and cat all of them into a single file, like I have done, right? Etsy audit rules.d. I've essentially done something like that in Unified Rules. So I have a whole bunch of rules of different types of rule sets in here. And again, you can see sometimes I've put the same system calls and like this rule and this rule and this rule and this rule. And the whole idea was that when I do the troubleshooting video on how to troubleshoot audit rules, I was going to point out that each one of these lines could be causing a conflict. Now they're all independently different, so maybe all of these are actually acceptable because they have different field operators. Okay. So the other cool thing is that when you do system call rules, like I was pointing out earlier, you can do, specify another field to monitor an AUID, the actual user ID. If it's greater than 1,000, you want to track any system call related things for any user ID over greater than or equal to 1,000 that are interacting with these system calls. And again, I think we're finally hit the ball out of the park here, but you can use the key perm_mod to go find those in the audit.log or all of the audit.logs in the var log audit directory. Okay, so we've hit quite a few details, and again, the whole idea was to go over the rules, where you can find copies of them so you can generate your own rules if you need to, how to look at the rules and figure out what you're doing. There's just so much. So yeah, that's it. We have covered everything in terms of what are rules, what are the types of rules, where are they stored for samples, where are they stored if you want them effective. One of the other things I want to point out to you is this is where you put them in the Etsy audit rules.d directory so that when you reboot the machine or you restart the audit daemon itself, it goes into this directory, finds a file hopefully. If it does, then great, it will load rules. But when it loads rules, as a result, it actually generates another file called audit.rules in the Etsy audit directory, one level up from rules.d. And then there's audit.rules.prev for the previous set that had been used. And there's audit-stop rules. I'm not quite sure what that is. Let's take a look at that real quick because it's been since February. Yeah. So basically, to stop the rules, you would do a -D. All right. If you want to understand a little bit more, I guess I should cover the control rules a little bit. What's important to know is that you can set up the audit rules so that, if you have a hacker logs in and he wants to stop you monitoring his behavior on your system, there's a way to prevent him from even preventing you from monitoring him. Cool. So we go back into that rules.d directory. And the very last rule of the unified rules, because I actually put it in there explicitly, has a -e as an echo, lowercase e, 1. These rules, again, like everything else in Linux, case sensitive. The E is basically for the immutability of rules. So basically, you load rules into memory after a reboot or whatever. The -E1 makes things a little bit more lax and uncomfortable for a hacker, actually. But the -E space 2 would actually make them very comfortable for a hacker. In other words, the hacker won't be able to change anything in the audit without first modifying the file and then rebooting the whole system so that when the system reboots, it would use your file and load up whatever was in that file along with his change. Now, I'm thinking he probably would want to wipe out the entire file, remove all the immutability, remove all the system control rules, remove all the file rules, remove all of the system call rules, all of them, delete them, reboot the server if he knows he's being monitored, which, a lot of organizations are doing that now. And then he can go about his happy way and get along with doing whatever he wants in your system. Again, not cool. So that's why we set up audit, and that's why we set up important, appropriate audit rules that don't cause conflict with the other audit rules, and because it's a very delicate balance between monitoring stuff one way and monitoring stuff another way. You just got to do it one way, and then also making sure that your rules are immutable. Now, one of the cool things is, and I mentioned this in a previous video, by the way, you can use auditctl command space hyphen lowercase s, and all of the control rules that you loaded deliberately with some specific parameter to those rules will show up here, right? So the lowercase hyphen e space 1 is represented in this field here. Lowercase f space 1 right there. Rate limit is set to 0. I wonder, are we actually doing anything with rate limit? So let's take a look. I don't see anything in here. And I sorted these by basically lexicographically for a purpose, because what happens is you sort them. E obviously comes before W, but I then take this line and shove it to the very bottom of the file. And all the dash A rules are here, all the dash W rules are down here, and all the other control rules are different letters. So then I go and sort them and shove them up at the top for what I did. So I put in a backlog wait time of 60,000. I put the dash B for buffers at 8192. Standard is to put dash capital D in your audit rules. I put it in there. And then the login immutable control rules at the very top also. So I didn't specify a lowercase r, right? Go back to the Red Hat page, go back up to the control rules. Can we find them? Here we go. I did specify an F. Obviously, I did specify B. I specified lowercase e. I did not specify the lowercase r. And the lowercase s is not really a control rule so much as a command argument. Lowercase hyphen l, command argument, and then capital D. All right. So we've actually covered everything. Everything. If you want to change these things explicitly, go look in the man pages to figure out how you set them to what you need. Login immutable 1 locked. We're it. So thank you for your time. And again, please keep on coming back. I'm not doing this to make a living or anything like that. I'm trying to help make the Linux community a more intelligent, more aware, more educated society. And this is my way of trying to give back. Thank you.